A harmonic hum permeated the atmospheric regulators of the Sovereign Cradle. It was a sound of perfect alignment. The auditory signature of a vessel whose biomechanical architecture was fully synchronized with its crew. Warden Talon monitored the corridor's ambient data with clinical precision, noting 0 deviations. Then the human arrived. Liaison Ronan Hale stepped onto the organic, light-responsive decking, and the environmental equilibrium immediately suffered. He was a walking policy violation. Beside him stood Veyla. She was an anomaly Talon had been officially assigned to document. The visible pattern of branching light lines pulsing under her surface flickered erratically, a physical manifestation of her inability to integrate. This glow beneath her skin was notoriously unstable, marking her as inherently out of phase with the collective. Would a civilization engineered for flawless unity recognize the exact moment its foundation cracked, or just document the anomaly? Hale approached the cipher relay console with an uncoordinated physical momentum. He bypassed the standard neural handshake interface, choosing instead to manually strike the tactile inputs. He lacked spatial economy. The rhythmic squeak of his standard-issue human boots compressing against the sensitive organic decking echoed down the corridor. Talon logged the auditory intrusion as highly grating, a specific and entirely irrelevant detail that somehow managed to dominate his superior sensory processing, while he watched the careless human clumsily fumble with the Empire's most sophisticated zero-tolerance communication array. And Hale was a simple biological hazard, a careless organism. No, not a hazard, an unpredictable, unmapped variable. Veyla remained 2 paces behind the human, her posture unnaturally rigid. Her biometric output was isolated, refusing to merge into the ship's data stream. "I cannot assist you with the calibration," she stated, her vocal modulation flat. "I am defective." The human paused, his hand hovering over the crystalline interface. He turned to look at her, lacking the protocol to avert his gaze from her erratic bioluminescence. Talon and the secondary warden stiffened, their shared ambient light dimming in a synchronized display of institutional discomfort at the sheer informality of the interaction. In the convergence, one did not simply stare at a flawed specimen. "Defective," Hale repeated, the word rolling clumsily off his tongue. Alahai leaned back against the bulkhead, crossing his upper limbs. "Because you don't plug into the hive mind thing? Because my emotional resonance does not synthesize," Veyla corrected, her light lines pulsing with a dim, sickly yellow hue. "I process stimuli independently. It is a severe malfunction. It ensures I remain permanently alone among my own kind." Talon monitored the exchange, expecting the human to offer a standard diplomatic platitude or perhaps request a more functional liaison. Instead, the human's facial micro-expressions shifted into an undocumented configuration. There was a softening of the ocular muscles, a slight exhalation of breath that did not correlate with physical exertion. It was true recognition. "Yeah. Well," Hale said, his voice dropping an octave, abandoning all performative volume. "Well, we just figure it out as we go. You aren't broken, Veyla." He held her gaze. "You're whole." Talon's internal resonance frequency immediately shattered into jagged, discordant harmonics. The secondary warden's light plates clamped down tight, sealing in their luminescent output in a localized panic response. The walls of the Sovereign Cradle violently rippled, the ambient intelligence of the vessel registering the lexical impact of the phrase. A wave of chromatic distortion washed over the organic bulkheads. Talon felt an intense, suffocating pressure in his neuro-auditory receptors. Rather than process the catastrophic cultural violation that had just occurred, he found his mind desperately analyzing the tensile strength of the corridor's structural ribs, calculating the exact shear limits of the biomatter as if an immediate and violent hull breach were imminent. It was easier to fear the vacuum of space than to acknowledge the binding weight of what the human had just casually invoked. Veyla did not step back. For the first time since her manifestation in the primary records, her unstable glow arrested. The branching lines beneath her skin flared into a blinding solid white, stabilizing completely. She stepped toward the human, her hands parting in the ritualistic gesture of receipt. "You have spoken the affirmation," Talon interrupted, his voice heavily layered with automated imperial authority, stepping between them to sever their visual connection. "That is the wrong thing to say. Those words denote unconditional alignment. You have initiated a binding." Hale blinked, looking between the warden and the newly stabilized light of Veyla's epidermis. "I was just making a point. You have created a severe deviation that the court must immediately address," Talon stated, as the deep, tolling chime of imperial notification echoed through the deck plating. "Retract it, or face the resonance hall!" The transit from the communication sector to the resonance hall occurred in stifling, heavily regulated silence. Talon marched exactly 2 paces behind the human and the anomaly, his outer light plates completely locked down to prevent any leakage of his internal distress. The convergence did not walk. It flowed. Movement was a synchronized, collective action designed to minimize friction and maximize spatial harmony. Yet Ronan Hale merely strolled. He swung his upper limbs with uneven momentum, and he observed the soaring, organic architecture of the Imperial vessel with mild, entirely inappropriate curiosity. The environmental temperature within the transit tube plummeted by exactly 3 degrees. Talon registered the shift as a system-wide anxiety response from the ship itself. The Sovereign Cradle did not know how to process a bonded pair that did not share a neural link. It was a biological contradiction. Hale's casual gait forced Talon to constantly adjust his own stride, an infuriating micro-recalibration that further degraded the warden's internal equilibrium. The human smelled of oxidized sweat and synthetic fabric, a sharp, chaotic olfactory profile that aggressively clashed with the sterile, ozone-heavy air of the convergence. Beside him, Veyla was unrecognizable to her warden. She did not flicker. For her entire documented existence, her dermal luminescence had been a chaotic, sickly yellow pulse. It was the visual equivalent of a scream, a constant reminder of her inability to integrate with the collective emotional network. Now, that light was a terrifying, singular white intensity. It did not reach out to the ship. It did not seek the comforting, suffocating blanket of the hive mind. It stayed entirely within her own physical boundaries. Inside the central dome, thousands of synchronized figures formed concentric rings of flawless, pulsating gold along the tiered balconies. The collective harmony in this space was a literal physical weight. It was a cascading frequency that resonated directly in Talon's marrow, designed to subdue individuality and reinforce the supremacy of the whole. A standard biological organism should have been crushed by the psychic pressure, but the human merely scratched the back of his neck. A layered plural voice descended from the blinding apex of the chamber. The arbiter of the convergence spoke as one entity, utilizing thousands of vocal cords simultaneously. The sound caused the very air molecules to vibrate in geometric patterns. "A binding declaration has been registered within the primary atmospheric sensors," the arbiter hummed, a sound devoid of mercy. "Liaison Hale. Your atmospheric utterance implies permanent structural integration with a defective unit. We recognize your species' severe cultural ignorance regarding our biological imperatives. Hale stood at the very center of the perfection. He did not bow. You may retract the anomaly, the Arbiter continued, at the ambient light in the room intensifying to a punishing pitch. A pardon for verbal contamination is available. The defective unit will be processed. Processed, Hale repeated. The word sounded dirty in his mouth. Why is she defective? Hale asked, his voice carrying zero-modulated respect, utterly refusing the offered escape. Because she doesn't think exactly like you do? Because she doesn't fit into your neat little synchronized boxes? You call it instability. I call it having a personality. Talon felt his auditory receptors overloading. The human was lecturing the Empire. She isn't broken, Hale stated, gesturing to Veyla. The harmonic network fractured. Talon felt his own internal frequency violently rebel. A deep, conditioned disgust at this blatant disruption crashed directly into a forbidden, unauthorized fascination at the sheer beauty of Veyla's isolated, self-contained glow. He immediately began calculating the maximum disciplinary protocol for the human's insubordination, categorizing the exact penal codes required to, but the thought evaporated into pure static the second Hale turned his back on the Arbiter entirely. Hale looked only at Veyla. He did not raise his voice. He did not adopt a ritualistic posture of submission, while Talon distractedly tracked a single, lazy mote of dust, drifting aimlessly across the blinding, synchronized projection of the Arbiter's golden light. The human simply nodded. You're whole, Hale repeated, with absolute conscious intent. Veyla stepped forward, her light lines flaring in total, independent stabilization. She lowered her hands, breaking her species' submissive posture forever. I accept the alignment, she answered. The synchronized light of the chamber shattered. It broke apart into 10,000 individual frequencies, a chaotic spectrum of colors never permitted inside the hall. The Arbiter's projection violently wavered, processing a literal impossibility. The Arbiter finally lowered its optical sensors, validating the bond with a heavy, localized dimming of the central dais. Instead of collapsing under the sheer weight of the paradox, the vast and ancient network of the convergence merely shivered, bending around the undeniable truth of a human who said the wrong thing and the woman who finally belonged entirely to herself. Subtle variations began to ripple through the attending figures, a faint blue hue here, a jagged pulse there. The collective was adapting to the disruption. So Veyla looked at the human and smiled, a fully independent physiological gesture. Her dermal glow was no longer a symptom of malfunction. It was a clear, steady signature of an individual. A flawless foundation had cracked, but the structure remained standing,